The little girl came out of nowhere, her small sneakers slapping against the pavement as she ran toward the police officers standing beside their patrol car. Her face was streaked with tears, her breath uneven, as if she had been running for a long time. One of the officers immediately knelt down, lowering himself to her level, his voice calm but alert. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked gently. She tried to speak, but her words came out broken between sobs. Please follow me." "Foam," she managed to say, clutching his sleeve with tiny, trembling hands. The officers exchanged a quick glance. Something in her urgency, the fear in her wide eyes, made it clear this wasn't a simple case of a lost child. The second officer radioed their location, while the first reassured her softly. "Okay, we're coming with you. You're safe. Just show us the way." Without letting go, she turned and began to lead them down the street. Her pace was quick, almost desperate, as she glanced back every few seconds to make sure they were still behind her. The neighborhood grew quieter as they walked. Fewer people, more closed doors, and an unsettling stillness hanging in the air. "Is someone hurt?" one of the officers asked carefully. She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Mama. She won't wake up," she whispered. The words hit hard. The officers' expressions shifted, their steps quickening. They followed her around a corner, past a row of worn-down houses, until she stopped in front of a small, weathered home. The front door was slightly open, creaking softly in the breeze. The girl hesitated for a second, fear flickering across her face again. Then she pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The officers closed behind her. The house was quiet, too quiet. No television, no movement, just a heavy silence that seemed to press against the walls. The little girl pointed toward a room down the hallway, her hand shaking. "In there." The officers moved quickly now, hearts pounding, bracing themselves for what they might find as they stepped toward the open doorway. The officers stepped into the room with quiet urgency, every instinct on high alert. The air felt heavy, carrying a faint, unfamiliar smell that made one of them instinctively reach for his radio again. On a worn sofa, near the window, lay a woman, completely still, her face pale against the dim light filtering through thin curtains. "Mama," the little girl whispered again, her voice breaking as she took a hesitant step forward. The first officer quickly moved to the woman's side, gently placing 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. For a brief second, nothing seemed certain. Just silence and tension stretching unbearably thin. Then he felt it. Faint, slow, but there. "She's alive," he said firmly, glancing at his partner. "Barely call it in. We need medical. Now." The second officer was already speaking into his radio, his voice steady but urgent, as he requested an ambulance and described the situation. Meanwhile, the first officer checked her breathing, adjusting her position slightly to help keep her airway clear. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, tapping her shoulder lightly. There was no response, only a shallow rise and fall of her chest. The little girl stood frozen near the doorway, her small hands clenched into fists. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as she watched. One of the officers noticed and walked over, kneeling beside her again. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You were very brave." She shook her head, her voice barely audible. I thought she was gone." He gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No, you got help just in time." Moments later, the distant sound of sirens began to cut through the silence, growing louder with each passing second. The room, once still and suffocating, now carried a fragile sense of hope. Paramedics rushed in, moving quickly but carefully, their equipment clinking softly as they assessed the woman. An oxygen mask was placed over her face, and they began their work with practiced precision. "What happened?" one of them asked. "Not sure yet," the officer replied. "Daughter found her unresponsive." As they prepared to move her onto a stretcher, the woman stirred, faintly, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough to make everyone pause. Her fingers twitched, and a weak sound escaped her lips. The little girl gasped, her eyes widening. "Mama." One of the paramedics nodded gently. "She's fighting." "That's a good sign." As they carried her out, the officers guided the little girl alongside them. She held on to the edge of the stretcher, unwilling to let go, for fear slowly giving way to something else, fragile but growing. And in that moment, standing between fear and relief. Everyone understood just how close this story had come to ending very differently. The ambulance doors closed with a firm thud, and the siren pierced the air as it sped away, carrying the girl's mother toward the hospital. One of the officers stayed behind with the little girl, who stood on the sidewalk, watching until the flashing lights disappeared around the corner. Her small hand still trembled as she wiped her cheeks, trying to be strong. "Can I go with her?" she asked, her voice fragile but hopeful. The officer crouched beside her, speaking gently. "Your mom is going to get help right now. We'll make sure you see her very soon, okay? You won't be left alone." She nodded slowly, though her eyes remained fixed on the empty street. Inside the house, the second officer moved carefully through the rooms, making sure there was nothing else that could pose a danger. In the kitchen, he noticed unopened mail scattered across the counter, a glass of water tipped over, and a prescription bottle lying on its side. He didn't jump to conclusions, but it was clear life here hadn't been easy. When he stepped back outside, he gave a small nod to his partner, silently confirming what they both already felt. This wasn't just an emergency. It was a cry for help that had been building for a long time. "Do you have any family we can call?" the first officer asked the girl. She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's just me and Mama." The answer hung in the air, heavy and quiet. "All right," he said softly. "Then we'll stay with you until we figure everything out." Time seemed to move differently after that. A neighbor, drawn by the earlier commotion, stepped outside and offered a blanket. The officer wrapped it gently around the girl's shoulders. She clutched it tightly, as if it were something solid she could hold on to in the middle of all the uncertainty. "Is my mom going to be okay?" she asked after a moment. The officer didn't rush his answer. He met her eyes and spoke honestly, but with care. "She's getting the help she needs, and she's strong. You helped her more than you know." The girl looked down, processing his words. For the first time since she had run into the street, her breathing began to steady. Later, as arrangements were made to take her to the hospital, the officer opened the patrol car door for her. She paused before getting in, looking back at the small house, the place where fear had started, but also where her courage had changed everything. Without saying a word, she climbed into the seat, and as the car pulled away, there was a quiet understanding between everyone involved. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest strength. Because she chose to speak, a life was given another chance.